Crescent Moon, the history of America. Close your eyes, let your breathing slow down, and allow your mind to drift gently into a calm journey. We are going to travel through time softly, step by step, into the long story of America. Long before there were cities, before there were nations, before maps and borders existed, there was only land, vast land, stretching as far as the eye could see. There were great plains, rolling with tall grasses that waved gently in the wind. There were rivers, wide and deep, flowing slowly, carrying life to every corner. And there were mountains, high and ancient, standing silent like guardians of the earth. These lands were not empty. They were alive with people who had walked them for thousands of years. The first peoples of America, the native tribes, they came in different groups, with different languages and traditions. Some lived in the forests, building homes from wood and bark. Some traveled across the plains, following the great herds of buffalo. Others lived by the seas, fishing and gathering from the waters. Life was not easy, but it was deeply connected to nature. They believed that everything carried a spirit. The trees, the rivers, the stones, even the winds that blew across the land. Every sunrise was a gift, every hunt a sacred act, every fire a circle of life. For thousands of years, these peoples lived with the rhythm of the earth. Generations passed, stories were told, songs were sung. The land was their home, and they cared for it as it cared for them. But far away, across a vast ocean, in another part of the world, change was coming. In Europe, ships were being built. Brave men were dreaming of unknown seas, and soon they would begin long journeys, searching for new lands. One of those journeys changed the world forever. In the year 1492, a man named Christopher Columbus sailed westward. He believed he would find a new route to Asia. Instead, he reached islands in the Caribbean islands that were already home to vibrant peoples and cultures. Columbus thought he had discovered a new world, but in truth, these lands were not new at all. They had been lived in, loved, and cherished for countless generations. Still, for Europe, this discovery opened a door that could never be closed again. After Columbus came more explorers. The Spanish sailed, planting their flags in the south. The French arrived, moving into the north, seeking furs and trade. The English came too, looking for places to settle. At first, the settlements were small, wooden huts near the shore, smoke rising into the sky, men and women struggling against hunger and cold. Many times, the colonies nearly failed, but somehow, with courage and hope, people stayed. They built small farms, planted seeds, and began to dream of life in this vast, unknown world. Imagine it now. The year is the early 1600s. A small group of settlers gathers around a fire. They speak of England, far across the ocean. They whisper of survival, of faith, of the chance to begin again. At the same time, native peoples watched carefully. Some offered food, teaching newcomers how to plant corn, how to fish in the rivers. Others were cautious, uncertain of these strangers with their strange tools and clothing. The early years were fragile. Many died from sickness, from hunger, from the long winters. But still, the colonies held on. Slowly, they grew stronger. Villages turned into towns, towns into small cities. By the mid-1700s, 13 colonies stretched along the Atlantic coast. They were full of farms, shops, and churches. Children played in the streets. Horses carried goods along dirt roads. Bells rang on Sundays. Yet beneath this quiet growth, a tension was forming. The people in the colonies lived thousands of miles away from England. But England wanted control. Taxes were demanded. Rules were enforced. And the colonists began to feel a restless desire for something more, for freedom. But that is a story we will save for the next part of our journey. For now, let your mind rest on these first moments of America's tale, a land of endless forests and rivers, a land of native peoples and the first settlers, a land just beginning to awaken into history. Breathe slowly. Stay calm. The story continues soon. Take another slow breath. Let your mind settle into the story once again. The land of America is no longer only forests and rivers. Now there are towns, farms, ships in the harbors. The 13 colonies are alive with people, and their story is moving toward something new. Life in the colonies was not easy, but it was steady. Families worked from sunrise to sunset. Children carried water, gathered wood, and helped in the fields. Mothers cooked over open fires, sewed clothes, and cared for the young. Fathers farmed the soil, fished in the rivers, or crafted tools in workshops. There was laughter, too, at church gatherings, at markets, during harvest festivals. But in every conversation, there was also a shadow. That shadow was England. The colonies were still tied to the British crown. Ships brought goods from London and carried tobacco, cotton, and grain back across the ocean. At first, this system seemed acceptable, but as time passed, the crown demanded more and more. Taxes on tea, taxes on stamps and paper, taxes on glass and paint. The colonists felt squeezed, unheard, and unseen. In taverns and meeting halls, whispers grew louder. Why should we pay so much? Why can't we decide for ourselves? Freedom, the word, rose like a flame. In Boston, anger spilled into the streets. Men dressed as native warriors boarded ships and threw chests of tea into the harbor. The water turned dark with leaves of tea floating in the cold night air. This act, the Boston Tea Party, was not just a protest, it was a warning. England responded with force. Soldiers marched in red coats, muskets on their shoulders. Tension spread through the colonies like fire in dry grass. And then the first shots were fired. In April 1775, at Lexington and Concord, farmers and townsmen stood against the king's army. It was the spark that lit the American Revolution. For 8 long years, the war raged. Battles in fields, in forests, along rivers. Families torn apart. Hunger, cold, and fear were constant companions. But there was also courage. Ordinary men became soldiers. Women carried supplies, nursed the wounded, and kept homes alive. Leaders rose with vision. George Washington, tall and steady, guiding his weary army through winters of hardship. The world watched. France, seeing an opportunity, joined the colonists with ships and soldiers. Slowly, the tide began to turn. And then came a moment unlike any other. On July 4th, 1776, in Philadelphia, men gathered in a hall. They signed a paper that would change the course of history. The Declaration of Independence. The words still echo softly. All men are created equal. They are endowed with certain unalienable rights: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These were not just words on paper. They were a promise, a dream, a vision of a nation not yet fully born. The war dragged on. Valley Forge, where soldiers shivered without shoes. Yorktown, where cannons roared and final battles were fought. And finally, in 1783, peace was declared. The colonies were free, but freedom brought new questions. What kind of nation would this be? How could 13 colonies become one country? Could a people so different and so scattered truly govern themselves? Leaders met once again. They wrote the Constitution, a framework of laws and balance. They debated fiercely about power, about rights, about the voice of the people. And at last, they created a system unlike any before, a republic built on the idea of liberty. George Washington, the quiet general who had refused to be called king, became the first president. He led with patience and strength, guiding the fragile young nation. His calm words reassured a people unsure of their future. And so, America's first steps as a nation began. Still small, still fragile, yet filled with possibility. The road ahead was long. There would be triumphs. There would be mistakes. But the story had begun, and it would not be stopped. Now, let your mind rest here, on the image of a new nation, fragile but hopeful, the sound of bells in Philadelphia, the quiet dignity of Washington, the dream of liberty, whispering softly across the land. The journey continues. In the next part of our story, take another deep breath. Let yourself sink into calmness. The young United States has just been born, but a new nation is like a child. It must learn how to stand, how to walk, how to survive. The revolution ended, but the struggles were not over. The people of America looked around and saw uncertainty. They were free, yes, but freedom without order can feel like chaos. The question whispered everywhere was, how do we govern ourselves? The first attempt was called the Articles of Confederation. It joined the states loosely, like threads tied, but not woven. The government was weak. There was no strong leader, no steady system for collecting money or making decisions. Problems grew, states argued, debt weighed heavily, and some feared the new country might break apart before it had even truly begun. So leaders gathered once more in Philadelphia. They debated in warm summer rooms, windows open, sweat on their brows. Voices rose, hands slammed on tables, but patience also held them together. At last, from argument and compromise, a new framework emerged, the Constitution of the United States. This document was not perfect, but it was strong. It divided power carefully. It gave rights to the people and created balance between the states. It was, in its own way, a promise that the young nation could survive and grow. When the Constitution was accepted, it needed a leader, and everyone turned to George Washington. He had already given so much years of battle, years of sacrifice. He wanted a quiet life on his farm. Yet once again, he answered the call. In 1789, George Washington became the first president of the United States. He was calm, steady, and wise. He refused to be called king. He knew this new land must be different, built not on crowns, but on the will of the people. For 8 years, Washington guided the fragile country. He encouraged unity, warned against division, and stepped down when his time was finished. This act alone taught the world that power could be passed peacefully, without war. After Washington, other leaders rose. John Adams, then Thomas Jefferson. Each faced challenges. Some came from abroad, conflict with Britain and France, struggles on the seas. Others came from within political rivalries, debates about rights and laws. Yet the greatest challenge, perhaps, was the land itself. America was small, hugging the Atlantic coast, but beyond the mountains stretched endless spaces, rivers, forests, plains waiting to be explored. Settlers dreamed of moving west, building farms, raising families. The frontier called to them like a song. In 1803, President Jefferson made a bold move. He purchased the Louisiana Territory from France. For a small price, the United States doubled in size overnight. It was a land of mystery, rivers not yet mapped, mountains not yet climbed, prairies rolling farther than anyone could see. To explore this vastness, Jefferson sent 2 men, Lewis and Clark, with a team of brave souls, and the help of a native woman named Sacagawea. They set out on a long journey. They traveled up the Missouri River, across the Rocky Mountains, and finally reached the Pacific Ocean. They faced hunger, storms, and danger, but they also discovered wonders. Great herds of buffalo, snow-capped peaks, endless skis. Their journey filled America with a dream that the nation's future stretched westward into the horizon. But dreams of expansion carried heavy costs. For native peoples, the story was different. Tribes who had lived on the land for generations now faced settlers taking fields, building roads, cutting forests. Conflicts rose, Treaties were made and broken, and sorrow grew deep. The story of America was becoming one of both hope and hardship. By the early 1800s, the United States was no longer just an experiment. It was a growing, breathing nation. Its people farmed, traded, and argued about politics. Its leaders wrestled with questions of law, power, and liberty. And its spirit, restless, bold, full of energy, pushed it ever forward. Imagine the sound of wagon wheels creaking along dirt paths, families moving west, carrying hope in wooden carts. Imagine the flicker of lamplight in new towns, the laughter of children playing near fresh-built homes, and yet also imagine the silence of forests cut down, the sadness of native families forced to move. This is the dual rhythm of America, growth and loss, hope and pain, always together. As you rest now, picture the young republic, its flag with only a few stars, waving in the wind. A nation learning how to be free, how to grow, how to hold its fragile unity. Breathe slowly and let the story drift with you. For in the next part, the young nation will face storms it never expected. The young nation continued to stretch and grow, its people moving forward in quiet determination. Settlers traveled along rivers and across mountains, carrying hope, provisions, and the stories of their families. Small towns became larger towns, and new settlements appeared where once only forests had stood. Life on the frontier was both beautiful and difficult. Children ran through fields as the sun rose, their laughter mingling with the morning breeze. Farmers tended their crops, plowing the soil, planting seeds that would one day feed many. Mothers and fathers worked side by side, building homes, tending animals, and sharing meals by the soft glow of a fire. Yet even as the nation expanded, challenges quietly pressed upon it. The young country was full of promise, but it also carried divisions. The North and the South grew apart in their economies, their customs, and their ideas about the future. Slavery remained a heavy and painful question, unresolved but impossible to ignore. The federal government, still finding its strength, guided the nation with care. Leaders like James Madison and Thomas Jefferson balanced vision with caution, trying to maintain unity and peace. The courts, the Congress, and the presidency worked together to shape laws that would allow the nation to grow while keeping liberty as its foundation. Meanwhile, the land itself called to the people. The Mississippi River, winding and vast, carried boats filled with goods and families seeking new homes. The forests whispered stories of long ago inhabitants, of deer and bears, and the quiet patience of nature. Mountains rose silently, offering challenges to be climbed and admired. In 1812, the United States faced war once again. Conflicts with Britain tested the strength of the nation, both on land and at sea. Soldiers marched, sailors navigated stormy waters, and citizens supported them however they could. Though battles were fought, and hardships endured, the young nation survived, learning lessons about resilience and unity. As the years passed, more opportunities appeared in the West. New roads were built, connecting towns and cities. Steamboats carried passengers and goods along the rivers, moving more quickly than ever before. Railroads began to stretch across the land, linking distant places with iron threads. The promise of America was growing stronger. Farmers and merchants, artisans and teachers, each contributed to the rhythm of life. The nation was still learning, still discovering the balance between freedom and responsibility, growth and care, the individual and the community. Education became more important. Schools appeared in towns and villages, where children learned reading, writing, and the ideas that would guide them into adulthood. Books traveled along rivers and roads, carrying knowledge and stories to those willing to listen. Communities flourished quietly. Church bells rang softly over towns, calling people to gather and reflect. Markets filled with sounds of conversation, the scent of bread, and the gentle clatter of carts. And in every home, families shared meals, told stories, and whispered hopes for the future. Yet as the nation expanded, tensions beneath the surface quietly grew. Questions about rights, about land, and about equality lingered. Native peoples faced increasing pressures as settlers moved westward, and treaties were often broken. These struggles were part of the nation's story, woven quietly among the tailies of farms, schools, and towns. The young United States pressed on, guided by vision and determination. Every day brought new discoveries, new towns, and new voices shaping the nation. The rivers, mountains, and forests watched over it all, a silent presence reminding people of the land's enduring strength. Imagine the sun setting behind distant hills, the sky painted in gentle shades of pink and gold. Families gather around fires, tired but hopeful. Children listen to stories of the nation's beginnings, of leaders who made choices with care, of explorers who ventured into the unknown. The quiet growth of towns, the steady rhythm of daily life, and the gentle expansion into new lands all carried the nation forward. It was a story not of sudden leaps, but of persistence, patience, and quiet courage. And as the nation moved ever onward, the lessons of the past whispered softly in every field, every river, and every forest. The people of America continued to build, to learn, and to hope. With each passing day, the young nation shaped itself with care, slowly and deliberately. In the calm rhythm of life, the nation continued to stretch westward, its people moving steadily into lands, both vast and unfamiliar. Rivers flowed gently past growing settlements, and forests whispered stories of long ago inhabitants. The plains seemed endless, carrying the soft wind over grasses that swayed like waves on a calm sea. Farmers tilled the soil, planting corn, wheat, and vegetables that would sustain families communities alike. They rose early with the sun, working diligently while the birds sang overhead. Children played nearby, sometimes helping, sometimes watching, learning the rhythm of daily life. Mothers carried water from wells, tended gardens, and prepared meals by warm fires, while fathers mended tools, guided wagons, and watched the horizon. Life was not easy, yet there was a quiet satisfaction in effort, a deep connection between people and the land they loved. The young nation was still discovering its identity, learning to balance freedom with responsibility. Every small town, every modest farm was a step forward, a brushstroke in the grand canvas of a growing country. During these years, explorers and adventurers ventured even further west. They mapped rivers, crossed mountains, and encountered wildlife previously unknown to many. The stories of these journeys inspired settlers to dream of new homes, new farms, and new communities. In 1803, the Louisiana Purchase had doubled the country's size, and the dreams of expansion were now even larger. Lewis and Clark's expedition had shown that the nation's boundaries were not limits, but invitations. Each river, each valley, each peak carried the potential for life, work, and discovery. Yet expansion also brought challenges. Native tribes, who had lived on these lands for generations, faced displacement and sorrow. Treaties were often misunderstood or broken, leading to tensions and pain. The growth of the nation was entwined with both hope and hardship, each step forward carrying the weight of its consequences. Meanwhile, the young United States was developing economically and culturally. Cities on the coast thrived with trade and commerce. Merchants moved goods across oceans, while artisans crafted tools, furniture, and clothing. Education slowly spread into rural areas, where schools opened, and children learned reading, writing, and the ideas that would guide the future. Transportation was changing the nation as well. Steamboats navigated rivers more swiftly than ever before, connecting towns and cities along their winding paths. Roads and bridges extended into previously unreachable lands, and the first railroads began to weave across the countryside, threading communities together with iron tracks. As the population grew, so did debates and discussions. Leaders and citizens alike pondered the questions of their time: how to maintain justice and liberty, how to balance the needs of the growing population with the preservation of the land, how to ensure peace while pursuing progress. The country faced conflicts beyond its borders too. In 1812, a war with Britain tested the resilience of the young nation. Soldiers marched across unfamiliar fields. Sailors navigated stormy waters, and ordinary citizens contributed in quiet ways, preparing supplies, caring for families, and keeping life moving forward. Despite challenges, the nation endured and learned the value of unity and perseverance. The early 1800s were also a time of invention and discovery. People experimented with new farming tools, machines, and techniques that made work more efficient. Communities began to flourish as life became slightly easier and opportunities multiplied. Still, the nation's progress was always accompanied by the complexity of human choices. Some thrived, some struggled. Some lands were claimed and cultivated, while others were left wild. Reminders of the untamed beauty that had first greeted the earliest inhabitants. The rhythm of daily life, the rise and set of the sun, the flowing rivers, the changing seasons remained a quiet companion, shaping the pace of growth and reflection. Through these years, the United States quietly matured. Families nurtured children who would become farmers, teachers, merchants, and leaders. Every act of care, every effort toward building, contributed to the story of a nation still young, still learning. Imagine the soft murmur of towns along rivers, the gentle flicker of fires in cabins, and the rustle of leaves in forests nearby. The land itself seems to breathe slowly, watching over the growing country with patience and calm. This period of expansion, growth, and quiet discovery laid the foundation for the nation's future. Each day added a layer of strength, knowledge, and hope, blending seamlessly with the past and preparing for the challenges to come. The young United States continued, moving forward steadily and thoughtfully, carrying both the dreams of its people and the lessons of its history, while the land, rivers, and forests held its story gently, waiting to see what would unfold next. The nation continued its journey, stretching further west, its people moving slowly but steadily across rivers, plains, and forests. The land was vast, full of life, and full of challenges. The rhythm of daily life, sunrise and sunset, work and rest, laughter and quiet reflection carried the country forward in gentle, persistent steps. During these years, tensions began to grow within the nation. The North and the South were different in many ways. The North was building cities, factories, and trade networks, while the South relied on agriculture, plantations, and labor that often included the forced work of enslaved people. These differences created questions that were not easily answered. The young nation learned, slowly and sometimes painfully, that freedom and unity were delicate and required careful attention. Despite these challenges, people continued to build, create, and dream. Families tended their homes. Children learned from parents and teachers, and communities supported one another. The land itself seemed to encourage careful progress. Rivers carried goods and letters. Mountains stood silently in the distance, and forests whispered stories of resilience and endurance. But the issue of slavery pressed heavily on the nation's heart. Voices rose in towns and cities, calling for justice, fairness, and equality. Some leaders spoke boldly, while ordinary people debated quietly over fires and at markets. It was a time of reflection, discussion, and sometimes conflict. Meanwhile, America faced challenges beyond its borders. The War of 1812 tested the young country once more. Soldiers marched along unfamiliar roads. Sailors navigated stormy seas, and families coped with worry and uncertainty. Through it all, the nation endured, learning the importance of resilience and unity. As the nation grew, so did its transportation and communication. Steamboats carried goods and people along rivers more efficiently than ever before. Roads stretched across plains and through forests, connecting towns and settlements. The first railroads began to weave across the country, offering glimpses of a future where distance would no longer limit connection. Cultural growth also moved quietly alongside physical expansion. Schools opened in towns and rural areas alike, teaching reading, writing, arithmetic, and the ideas that would guide the next generation. Churches and meeting halls became places not only for worship, but also for discussion, learning, and shared community experiences. Stories, songs, and local news traveled along the rivers, the roads, and the rail lines, weaving a sense of unity among people separated by miles, but connected by purpose. Exploration continued as well. People mapped rivers, crossed mountains, and ventured into territories that had once been untouched. Every journey revealed new lands, new resources, and new challenges. Settlers learned to respect the power of the land, even as they transformed it to meet their needs. Yet, alongside growth, there were reminders of struggle. Native peoples faced increasing pressure from settlers, and treaties were often misunderstood or ignored. These quiet tensions, layered beneath daily life, were part of the complex fabric of the nation. Life moved forward, but history's lessons remained present, shaping decisions, interactions, and the nation's path. In towns and villages, life maintained its rhythm. Fires glowed softly in cabins and homes. Children listened to stories of the past, and elders reflected on the challenges and successes of each day. Farmers tended fields, while merchants moved goods. Teachers instructed children, and neighbors helped neighbors in countless quiet ways. The young United States, still learning, still fragile in some ways, moved steadily forward. Every action, every choice, built the foundation for the next generation. The land itself, rivers, mountains, forests, and plains, watched over the nation, guiding it with patience and endurance. This era, though full of challenges, was also full of promise. It was a time when the nation began to understand its strength, its limitations, and the responsibilities that freedom carried. Each day, communities grew, ideas spread, and the young republic continued its careful, persistent journey. The people of America, with all their efforts, hopes, and struggles, laid the groundwork for the nation to face what lay ahead. And as the sun set over fields and rivers, the quiet strength of the land and its people carried the country forward, ever steady, ever resilient. The young nation continued to grow, stretching its boundaries westward and shaping its identity with each passing day. Rivers carried boats filled with goods and families. Forests whispered quietly in the distance, and mountains stood tall and still, watching over the land. Life in towns and on farms continued in a gentle, steady rhythm. Children ran along dirt paths, helping in small ways and playing in the open fields. Mothers carried water, tended gardens, and prepared meals over warm fires, while fathers plowed, fished, and guided wagons along roads that slowly stretched across the countryside. The sun rose and set with a comforting regularity, marking the passage of time in a soft, predictable pattern. Communities grew quietly. Schools opened their doors, teaching reading, writing, and arithmetic to eager children. Churches and town halls became places of learning, discussion, and reflection. Stories, songs, and news traveled along rivers, roads, and the early railways, connecting people separated by distance, but united in purpose. At the same time, the nation faced challenges. The divide between North and South grew, driven by differences in economy, culture, and ideas about labor and slavery. While some cities thrived with factories, trade, and innovation, southern plantations relied on crops and the labor of enslaved people. These differences were subtle at first, but over time, they shaped debates and discussions in quiet ways that would grow louder in the years ahead. The land itself invited exploration and settlement. Rivers, valleys, and forests offered both opportunity and challenge. Settlers built homes, planted crops, and navigated unfamiliar terrain with care and determination. The wilderness was both teacher and companion, demanding respect and patience while offering the promise of life and sustenance. Innovation and discovery moved quietly alongside expansion. Farmers experimented with new tools, improving efficiency and shaping the land with thoughtfulness. Merchants and artisans crafted goods, while steamboats and early railroads began connecting distant communities in ways never before imagined. Life carried a gentle rhythm. Families gathered around fires, sharing meals and stories. Children listened to the voices of elders, learning lessons of perseverance, hope, and care. Every day, communities worked together to maintain the balance between progress and the quiet beauty of the land. The young nation also learned from conflict. The War of 1812 tested courage and endurance, with soldiers and sailors facing challenges on land and sea. Families worried, yet continued their daily lives, supporting each other in quiet, meaningful ways. Through hardship, the country learned resilience, patience, and the value of unity. Expansion continued. The Louisiana Territory, acquired years before, encouraged settlers to move westward. Explorers mapped rivers, crossed mountains and documented wildlife and landscapes that were both breathtaking and demanding. Every new journey carried lessons for future settlers, teaching them how to live in harmony with the land and with each other. Native peoples faced profound challenges. Communities who had lived for generations were displaced. Treaties were often broken, and life changed in ways both sudden and gradual. The story of the nation included these quiet sorrows, intertwined with the hopes and labors of settlers and pioneers. The rhythm of everyday life, sunrise, work, meals, stories, rest, continued alongside these larger events. It was a rhythm that shaped the nation just as surely as any law or policy. Families, towns, rivers, and forests together created a story of steady growth, careful progress, and enduring patience. As cities expanded along the Atlantic coast and new settlements appeared inland, the nation's culture and ideas flourished. Schools taught children to read and write. Arts and music spread quietly, and ideas traveled along roads and rivers. People learned not only from books and teachers, but from the land, from neighbors, and from the quiet unfolding of daily life. The United States continued to grow in size, population, and understanding of its own identity. Every day brought small victories, quiet achievements, and lessons learned from mistakes. The nation pressed forward, gently and steadily, carrying its people, their hopes, and the lessons of history with it. And as the sun set over fields, rivers, and forests, the country rested, gathering strength for the days to come. The rhythm of life, gentle, persistent, and calm, carried the young nation forward, quietly shaping its path while holding space for reflection, learning, and hope. The young nation continued to stretch westward, moving steadily into lands that were vast, quiet, and full of life. Rivers flowed gently past growing towns. Forests whispered softly in the distance, and mountains rose with calm strength, watching over the land. Life on farms and in small towns carried on in a comforting rhythm. Children ran through open fields, sometimes helping with chores, sometimes simply exploring. Mothers tended gardens, carried water, and prepared meals by warm fires. Fathers plowed the soil, guided wagons along new roads, and mended tools in workshops. Sunrise and sunset marked the passage of time, bringing with it a quiet sense of continuity. Communities expanded quietly yet steadily. Schools opened, teaching children to read, write, and think. Churches, town halls, and meeting places became centers of reflection, learning, and connection. Stories, songs, and news traveled along rivers, roads, and early railways, binding distant towns together with a shared sense of purpose. The nation faced subtle challenges as it grew. Differences between North and South became more apparent. The North embraced cities, factories, and trade, while the South relied on agriculture and the labor of enslaved people. These contrasts shaped conversations, debates, and choices in ways that were often quiet but deeply important. Expansion moved forward with careful attention. Settlers built homes, farmed the soil, and explored unfamiliar lands with both determination and respect. The wilderness remained a teacher, reminding people of patience, endurance, and the balance required to live in harmony with the land. Innovation and progress accompanied growth. New farming tools, machines, and techniques made daily work more efficient. Merchants and artisans contributed quietly to the rhythm of life, creating goods that strengthened communities. Steamboats and early railroads carried people, goods, and ideas, connecting distant corners of the nation. Daily life remained a gentle rhythm, blending ordinary tasks with quiet achievements. Families shared meals and stories. Neighbors helped one another, and children absorbed lessons from the land and those around them. The patterns of work, rest, and reflection guided the young nation as surely as any law or policy. The country learned from conflict as well. The War of 1812 tested the nation's endurance, with soldiers marching and sailors navigating dangerous waters. Families coped with uncertainty, supporting one another and keeping life moving forward. These experiences strengthened the nation, teaching patience, unity, and resilience. Settlement continued westward. Rivers, valleys, forests, and plains became homes, farms, and communities. Explorers mapped landscapes, recorded wildlife, and shared knowledge that would guide future settlers. Each journey added to the quiet story of growth, learning, and adaptation. Native peoples faced increasing challenges. Communities that had lived on these lands for generations were displaced. Treaties were misunderstood or broken, and lives were forever changed. These events formed a subtle, underlying current, reminding the young nation that growth always carries consequences. Even amid challenges, the country's cultural life flourished. Schools educated children, arts and music spread through communities, and people learned not only from books, but from neighbors and the land itself. Stories of perseverance, hope, and quiet courage traveled through villages and towns, gently shaping the national character. The United States continued to grow in size, population, and understanding of itself. Each day brought quiet victories, lessons learned, and gentle steps toward a future yet unseen. The land, rivers, forests, and plains carried the story of the people with patience and endurance, guiding the young nation in its journey. As the sun set over the landscape, fields and forests bathed in warm light, the nation rested. Communities gathered around fires, reflecting on the day, sharing stories, and preparing for tomorrow. In this calm, steady rhythm, the young United States continued its careful journey, quietly shaping its identity, its culture, and its place in the world. The nation had grown, spreading across rivers, plains, and forests. Yet its heart remained complex, quiet, and full of contradictions. Life on the frontier continued in gentle rhythm. Yet, beneath the surface, questions and tensions quietly shaped the young country. Communities were growing, but not all lived in the same way. In towns and cities, merchants traded goods. Workshops hummed with the sound of artisans crafting tools and furniture. And schools quietly shaped the minds of children. Families lived simply, yet with purpose, children helping in fields, mothers cooking, sewing, and caring for the young, fathers plowing, guiding wagons, and tending livestock. Life's rhythm was comforting. Yet the challenges of building a nation were never far away. The economy was diversifying. Northern towns and cities began to embrace industry. Mills and small factories sprang up along rivers, their wheels turning slowly, carrying the promise of new goods, new jobs, and a future where communities could thrive in many ways. Trade networks expanded, carrying goods not only within the country, but also across oceans, connecting the young United States to distant lands. Meanwhile, in the South, the land remained dominated by agriculture. Plantations produced cotton, tobacco, and other crops, relying heavily on the labor of enslaved people. This system created wealth for some, but it came at the cost of freedom and humanity for many others. The tension between North and South, between industrialization and agriculture, was quiet yet ever present, forming a subtle undercurrent that would shape decades to come. Daily life continued in its gentle rhythm, yet the nation could not ignore these contrasts. People debated quietly in homes, at schools, and in town halls. Voices spoke of justice, liberty, and the meaning of freedom, even as children played and rivers flowed. These conversations shaped the nation's conscience. Expansion into new territories brought opportunities and challenges alike. The Louisiana Purchase had opened vast lands, and settlers traveled west with careful determination. Explorers documented rivers, mountains, and forests, guiding future settlers with maps, notes, and observations. Yet every mile gained came with costs. Native peoples, who had lived on these lands for generations, faced displacement, broken treaties, and sorrow. The nation learned, slowly, that growth could not come without consequences, and that the land carried stories older than any settlement. Education was slowly becoming a priority. Schools offered more than reading, writing, and arithmetic. They nurtured ideas, curiosity, and understanding of the world. Children absorbed lessons not only from teachers, but also from parents, neighbors, and the land itself. Knowledge moved quietly through rivers, roads, and the earliest railways, shaping young minds who would one day guide the nation. Transportation improved steadily. Steamboats moved more efficiently along rivers, carrying goods, letters, and people. Early railroads began to connect distant towns, offering a glimpse of a future where isolation would become rare. Roads extended into frontier lands, allowing settlers to move carefully, carrying hope, supplies, and knowledge into the unknown. The nation also faced moments of conflict. The War of 1812 tested courage and endurance. Soldiers marched across unfamiliar territory. Sailors navigated stormy waters, and families coped quietly with worry and uncertainty. Through it all, the young United States endured, learning lessons of resilience, unity, and patience. But not all challenges were external. Inside the nation, divisions grew. Slavery remained a moral and political question that touched every community in some way. Some argued fiercely against it, while others defended it quietly or openly. The tensions between North and South, between freedom and labor, were shaping a story deeper than geography, beyond economics. They were shaping the soul of the nation itself. At the same time, culture and art quietly flourished. Songs, stories, and local traditions traveled along rivers and roads. Music carried joy, sorrow, and hope. People shared stories of resilience, courage, and perseverance, reminding each other of the deeper meaning of life in a young, growing nation. Even as towns grew into cities and new states formed, the rhythm of everyday life remained a gentle guide. Farmers rose with the sun. Children learned and played. Families shared meals, and communities gathered in quiet reflection. The natural world, the flowing rivers, the tall forests, and the mountains that stood still for centuries remained a patient witness to human effort and ambition. The young United States, though still fragile in some ways, continued to shape its identity. Every choice, every act of work, and every moment of learning added to the story. The land, the rivers, and the forests carried the narrative with quiet endurance, shaping a nation not only of geography, but of spirit. The stories of individuals, teachers, farmers, merchants, mothers, fathers, children, explorers, formed a tapestry of persistence, hope, and careful growth. Each voice, each effort, added depth to the nation's character. By the end of this period, the United States had grown in size, population, and understanding of itself. It was a nation still young, still learning, yet increasingly aware of its responsibilities, its strengths, and the weight of its choices. Imagine the sun dipping behind distant hills, rivers reflecting soft light, and families gathering around fires. Children listen to stories of exploration, labor, and perseverance. Communities rest quietly, yet the rhythm of progress continues, moving the nation forward gently, thoughtfully, and with patience. The young United States pressed on, carrying both promise and responsibility. Its land, people, and ideas moved together, shaping a story that was gentle, continuous, and resilient. And through all of this, the nation learned that true growth was not only measured in miles traveled or cities built, but in understanding, care, and the quiet courage of its people, the United States continued its journey, moving forward steadily across rivers, forests, and plains, stretching toward horizons that were wide and full of promise. The land carried whispers of history in every tree, every mountain, and every river. The rhythm of daily life, work, rest, learning, and reflection persisted, quietly guiding the nation through growth and challenge. Communities thrived gently. Children ran through open fields, helping or playing, absorbing lessons from their surroundings. Mothers carried water, tended gardens, and cooked meals over fires that glowed warmly in cabins and homes. Fathers plowed soil, guided wagons, and maintained tools, ensuring life continued smoothly across towns and farms. The sun rose and set predictably, providing a soft rhythm that shaped daily existence. The country's population continued to grow. New towns appeared along rivers, forests, and plains. Merchants, artisans, teachers, and farmers contributed to the quiet progress of the nation. Goods traveled along rivers, roads, and early railways, connecting communities and ideas, making life richer, more complex, and more connected. Yet the nation's growth carried quiet tensions. The North was embracing industry, factories, and trade, while the South remained largely agricultural, reliant on labor that was not freely given. This contrast created debates and questions that were often quiet but persistent, shaping the moral and political heart of the country. Daily life remained gentle in appearance, but beneath it flowed layers of thought, discussion, and reflection. People talked in homes, at town halls, and in schools, considering what freedom, justice, and responsibility truly meant. Even as children laughed and rivers flowed, the nation was learning from every act, every conversation, every decision made in towns and farms. Expansion moved onward with care. Settlers crossed rivers, cleared forests, and explored valleys, learning to live in balance with the land. Each mile of progress carried knowledge, maps, and experience, guiding the next settlers who would follow. Yet the land held its own history, native peoples, living for generations, faced displacement and sorrow, quietly reminding the nation of the weight of growth. Education continued to flourish. Schools nurtured curiosity, thought, and understanding, teaching children not only practical skills, but also the values that would guide them into adulthood. Knowledge traveled along rivers, roads, and early railways, connecting communities and shaping the future. Transportation grew steadily. Steamboats moved along rivers with grace and efficiency. Railroads stretched across the countryside, linking distant towns. Roads extended into frontier lands, guiding families and traders carefully across challenging terrain. The nation also learned from conflict. The War of 1812, though quiet in memory now, tested courage, patience, and unity. Soldiers faced challenges on land, and sea, while families managed worry and uncertainty at home. Through it all, the country endured, learning lessons of perseverance, solidarity, and careful progress. Cultural life moved quietly but steadily. Stories, songs, and local traditions traveled along rivers, roads, and railways, connecting towns and communities. Music echoed through homes and fields, carrying joy, sorrow, and hope. Each tale, each melody, added depth to the understanding of life in a young and growing nation. The moral questions of the nation deepened. Slavery remained an unresolved issue, creating quiet tension in every region. Some voices spoke boldly against it, advocating justice and freedom. Others supported it, defended it, or ignored it. The contrast shaped politics, community life, and even the smallest personal interactions. Meanwhile, the land continued to guide, teach, and challenge. Rivers provided transport and sustenance. Mountains stood as steady reminders of endurance. Forests carried quiet lessons in patience and observation. Settlers learned from the land, respecting its power while shaping it for their needs. Families, towns, and communities maintained a gentle rhythm of life. Fires glowed in homes as evenings fell. Children listened to elder stories, learning about perseverance, courage, and hope. Neighbors helped one another in small, meaningful ways. Each action, each effort built the foundation for a stronger, wiser nation. The nation's identity was forming, not in sudden leaps, but in careful, deliberate steps. Every choice, every act of work, and every thoughtful conversation contributed to the growing understanding of freedom, responsibility, and community. By the end of this period, the United States had matured quietly, but meaningfully. It had grown in population, territory, and understanding. It had faced challenges, both internal and external, yet it moved forward with persistence and patience. Imagine the sun setting over rivers, plains, and forests, bathing everything in soft, golden light. Families gather around fires, reflecting on the day. Children absorb stories of history, courage, and careful progress. Communities rest, while the nation quietly continues its journey toward the future. Through all these gentle, persistent steps, the young United States learned that growth was measured not only in territory or industry, but in understanding, care, and the resilience of its people. The land, the rivers, and the forests carried the story of a nation, learning slowly, steadily, and deeply. The young United States continued to move forward, its people carrying hopes, responsibilities, and lessons learned through each passing year. The land stretched across vast rivers, plains, and forests, watching quietly as towns and communities grew, as families labored, and as children played. Daily life maintained a gentle rhythm. Mothers tended gardens, cooked meals over warm fires, and cared for the young, while fathers plowed fields, guided wagons, and mended tools. Children ran through open fields, learning from their surroundings, observing and absorbing lessons in patience, hard work, and connection. Sunrise and sunset marked the passage of time with comforting consistency, guiding both work and rest. Communities flourished quietly. Schools nurtured curiosity and learning, teaching children reading, writing, arithmetic, and values that would guide them as adults. Churches and town halls became centers of reflection and discussion. Stories, songs, and local news traveled along rivers, roads, and the earliest railways, connecting distant towns with shared understanding and purpose. The nation faced challenges beneath the surface. Differences between North and South continued to grow. The North embraced industry, trade, and urban development, while the South relied heavily on agriculture and the labor of enslaved people. These contrasts influenced discussions in homes, schools, and town halls, quietly shaping the moral and political character of the country, even in the midst of daily routines. The young nation confronted questions of freedom, justice, and responsibility. People debated quietly about what liberty meant, how to treat one another fairly, and how to balance growth with care for the land and its inhabitants. These conversations shaped the conscience of the country, influencing choices that would echo for generations. Expansion continued steadily. Settlers moved west, clearing forests, farming valleys, and mapping new territories. Explorers recorded rivers, mountains, and wildlife, guiding future communities and documenting lessons learned from the land. Yet every mile gained carried consequences. Native peoples faced displacement, sorrow, and broken promises, reminding the nation of the deeper costs of growth and expansion. Innovation progressed quietly alongside settlement. New farming tools improved efficiency, while artisans and merchants provided goods that strengthened local economies. Steamboats and early railroads connected towns, enabling communities to share resources, ideas, and knowledge more efficiently than ever before. The nation learned from conflict as well. The War of 1812, though now distant, had tested courage and endurance. Soldiers and sailors faced challenges on land and sea, while families endured worry and uncertainty at home. Through such trials, the country strengthened its resolve, learning the value of patience, unity, and perseverance. Cultural life thrived alongside growth and challenge. Songs, stories, and traditions traveled from town to town, connecting people across distance. Music carried joy, sorrow, and hope, while storytelling preserved lessons from the past. Through these cultural expressions, communities reinforced values of resilience, courage, and careful progress. The moral questions of the nation deepened further. Slavery remained unresolved, shaping communities and influencing politics. Some voices spoke boldly against it, advocating freedom and justice, while others defended or ignored it. The quiet tension between North and South, and between labor and liberty, formed a subtle undercurrent that influenced every aspect of life. The natural world remained a patient guide. Rivers provided transport and food. Forests offered resources and lessons in patience. And mountains stood as enduring symbols of strength. Settlers learned from these landscapes, respecting their power while shaping them carefully to meet human needs. Families, towns, and communities maintained a steady, comforting rhythm. Evening fires glowed in homes as children listened to elders, stories of courage and perseverance. Neighbors helped each other in small, meaningful ways. Every action, every effort contributed to the growth of a nation that was young, learning, and persistent. Through these years, the United States developed not only in size and population, but in understanding. It learned that growth was measured not only in land, cities, or industry, but in knowledge, care, and the quiet courage of its people. Every choice, every act of work, and every reflection shaped a nation that was slowly maturing, quietly resilient, and full of promise. Imagine the sun dipping behind distant hills, the rivers reflecting soft light, and families gathering around fires. Children absorb stories of perseverance, labor, and hope. Communities rest while the nation continues its journey, guided by patience, care, and steady determination. Through gentle, persistent steps, the young United States continued to define its identity. Its land, its people, and its ideas moved together, forming a story that was not sudden or loud, but continuous, reflective, and deeply resilient. And through all of this, the nation learned that true growth was measured in understanding, responsibility, and the quiet courage of its people. The United States, now a young nation of growing towns, cities, rivers, and plains, continued its journey quietly, thoughtfully, and steadily. Its land, wide and patient, held the stories of generations past, while its people shaped the path forward with careful hands and determined hearts. Daily life, though simple in appearance, carried layers of purpose and reflection. Mothers tended gardens and homes, cooking meals that nourished bodies and spirits alike. Fathers worked the soil, guided wagons, and mended tools, quietly ensuring that each day's efforts contributed to the continuity of life. Children explored fields, forests, and streams, learning through observation, curiosity, and gentle instruction. Sunrise and sunset marked each day with a calm rhythm, providing both comfort and structure. Communities continued to grow, interweaving commerce, learning, and cultural life. Merchants traded goods, artisans shaped tools and furniture, and schools nurtured young minds. Town halls and churches became places of reflection and debate, where ideas about justice, freedom, and responsibility were quietly considered and shared. Stories traveled along rivers and roads, spreading knowledge, culture, and lessons learned from the past. Yet beneath the calm, the nation faced challenges that demanded reflection. Differences between North and South remained, shaped by economy, labor, and culture. The North embraced industry, cities, and commerce, while the South remained reliant on agriculture and the labor of enslaved people. These contrasts influenced politics, daily life, and the moral conscience of the nation. Quietly, persistently, the country learned that freedom, justice, and unity required not only laws, but understanding, empathy, and reflection. Expansion moved forward with care. Settlers crossed rivers, cleared forests, and farmed valleys. Explorers mapped mountains, documented rivers, and recorded wildlife, guiding future generations. Yet every mile of growth brought consequences. Native peoples faced displacement, sorrow, and broken promises, reminding the nation that progress carries responsibility. Innovation and culture blossomed alongside settlement. Steamboats glided along rivers, connecting distant towns. Early railroads stretched across plains, linking communities and ideas. Farms benefited from new tools and techniques, while artisans and merchants enriched daily life with their craft. Schools encouraged curiosity, thought, and knowledge, preparing children to understand both the land and the society they would inherit. The nation's identity deepened. It was not defined solely by land or population, but by the shared experiences, struggles, and hopes of its people. Every small town, every family, every individual contributed to a story that was quiet yet profound, simple yet layered with meaning. Conflicts, both external and internal, shaped understanding. The War of 1812 had tested courage and endurance, teaching lessons in unity and perseverance. Slavery, unresolved and pressing, created moral and political tension across regions. Some voices called for freedom and justice. Others defended or ignored oppression. The nation learned, slowly and deeply, that true growth requires courage, empathy, and accountability. Even in hardship, culture flourished. Songs, stories, and traditions traveled across rivers and roads, binding people together through shared experience and understanding. Music carried joy, sorrow, and hope, while storytelling preserved lessons from the past and reflected the challenges and triumphs of everyday life. The natural world remained a patient teacher. Rivers guided travel and provided sustenance. Mountains offered strength and perspective. Forests demanded patience, observation, and respect. Settlers learned from the land, understanding that harmony with nature was both a practical necessity and a moral responsibility. Communities maintained a gentle, deliberate rhythm. Families shared meals and stories. Neighbors helped one another, and children absorbed the lessons of work, play, and observation. Every day, each small action contributed to the quiet growth of a nation that was young, learning, and persistent. As the nation matured, it began to understand that its strength lay not only in territory or population, but in knowledge, reflection, and moral courage. It was learning that growth carries responsibility, that freedom must be balanced with justice, and ambition with compassion. Every choice, every conversation, every thoughtful action shaped a nation that was not only physically expanding, but morally and culturally deepening. By now, the United States had achieved a careful balance between progress and reflection. Rivers, plains, forests, and mountains carried the stories of generations past and present, teaching patience, endurance, and wisdom. Communities, through work, culture, and connection, shaped a society that valued knowledge, courage, and quiet resilience. Imagine the soft glow of sunset over fields, rivers, and forests. Families gather around fires, listening to stories of courage, labor, and hope. Children absorb lessons about perseverance and careful growth. Communities rest, yet the nation's journey continues, quietly moving forward with purpose, care, and vision. In these final years of reflection, the young United States understood the delicate balance of its identity. It was a nation of land, yes, but also a nation of people, culture, ideas, and morality. It learned that history is not merely events and dates, but the quiet, persistent work of daily life, reflection, and shared responsibility. The young nation had endured wars, internal tensions, and challenges of expansion. It had learned the importance of education, cultural connection, and moral reflection. It had seen the costs of unchecked growth and injustice, and it had learned the value of patience, empathy, and care. As night falls across rivers, plains, and forests, the country rests, but its story continues, quietly and steadily, in the hearts of families, communities, and the land itself. The United States, young yet resilient, carries forward the lessons of its past, the hopes of its people, and the enduring rhythm of life, gentle, continuous, and deeply profound. Through every sunrise and sunset, through every river, field, and mountain, the nation has learned that its true strength lies not in speed or power, but in the careful, thoughtful, and courageous acts of its people. And with this understanding, it moves into the future, quietly, persistently, and with hope